Versarien is an engineering group that works and has patents in the new developing area of graphene technologies. Between October 2017 and September 2018, its shares rose a whopping 1,300+%. It's since seen shares come off. Well, we have asked the founder and Chief Executive Neill Ricketts in to discuss the recent developments and indeed what the company's doing. Neill, good to talk to you again.
Good morning, Jeremy.
Just tell us exactly where you are in terms of the business, because we've seen, as I said, this ramp up in shares. We'll talk a little bit more in detail about that, but clearly there's a lot of interest around the business. Just update us on what you're doing.
So the business has been really busy over the last 12 months in terms of making collaborations with very high profile global companies. These things take time. They're going through the testing. We're at the very, you could even argue that we're before the start of the race. But this is a new technology which is being developed, and this is a technology which could impact all of our lives. So the stakes are really, very high, and we're kind of trying to get to the point where we're leading that charge.
Yeah, I follow the stock and I've read all the updates. You seem to have a lot of business at the moment going or looking like it's going to develop in China. Is that right? Is that where you're majoring at the moment?
Yes, the team are very, they're kind of concentrating on 5 key areas at the moment, of which 2 of them are based in China. I started the whole Chinese journey February last year, so a relatively short period of time ago. And since then, the team, they've only just returned actually from China about a couple of weeks ago, where they've got more deals with manufacturers. They've got more interest from provinces that want to support us from a government level, which is very important in China. And going through that whole process of getting to the point of setting up and manufacturing in China to meet the Chinese market, which, as we know, is one of the largest in the world.
Yeah, I see a lot of memorandums of understanding being developed here. How much weight do you attach to these? Because these are not deals, are they, as such?
Not at the moment. So it's a process, as we just spoke about before. So we would have an inquiry, we would have some initial meetings to be able to flesh out whether or not there's any kind of synergy in what we want to achieve and what the customer wants to achieve, or the province. And then once we go through that process, then we'll sign a memorandum of understanding, which enables us to make sure that we're protected as best as we can. So we move on to the next stage. The next stage is a letter of intent, which is getting to the point of legally binding document. And once we've got the letter of intent, then we can actually start to work on joint venture agreements and so on. So it's a process very similar to dealing with a commercial organisation. And in fact, some of these are commercial organisations, but it is a process that we have to go through.
Yeah. Let's just bring up the share price so we can remind ourselves as to precisely where we are. And I was talking about that 1,300% rise that we saw from October 2017, all up to these highs that we saw here, up at around 193 pence or so. Here we are now at 87.95. What do you say to shareholders who've been in this stock for so long and are now seeing this drop? But on the other hand, of course, is those that saw this rise, got in, and now they're losing money. What's the message to keep shareholders interested in the business?
So this is a long journey. This isn't something that's going to happen in days. I don't think this is a share that you can trade successfully in. You'll notice that the graph that you're showing up there, has lots of peaks and has lots of troughs. And in fact, some of those peaks and troughs were a long time ago. And what we see with a story like this is that the bulls are energized by the news and the bears are energized by the lack of news. So they there's a fight going on as to the timing of each of those events.
Yeah, we asked for some questions to come in. I thought perhaps it's fair to pitch some of these to you. It starts off first of all with the board and your colleagues and so forth. And who decides on pay for a company like this? The business, of course, you're not really getting much generated income at the moment. You're working a lot of potential. Who sorts out who gets paid what?
So the remuneration committee is led by Ian Gray at the moment. We're currently going through the process of strengthening our board and looking for suitable candidates that can help us on our journey. So Ian will be hopefully joined by other members. And what we do is we use our advisors, our nomads and PwC that we use for our auditors in order to give us the best information about what are market rates. And then we generally pitch ourselves well below what we would consider the market average to be. There's lots and lots of reports out there that we use in order to get a snapshot of where that is, but we believe that we give good value for money. The other thing is that a lot of our remuneration is based around share options, so that we're also incentivized to to align our strategy with that of the long-term shareholders as well.
So it pains you obviously to see shareholders drop as much as they have, but obviously you've taken part in the gains, obviously.
Absolutely, yeah, and it is part of the journey of any business. It's not a straight line, and unfortunately, you know, we're always happier when the share price is higher than we are when it's lower. We're always busy when it's high, trying to achieve the next high, and when it's low, we're even busier, you know, trying to make sure that we take our responsibility to our shareholders very seriously.
You're the founder of the company, and I believe you still have 10% of shares. Is that right? Do you intend to sell down at all?
No. I've got just short of 10% now, 9.93%, I think it was when I last looked. The shareholding for me is really, really key because, again, it sets the share apart from a lot of other shares that are out there. You know, I'm a big shareholder, the largest current shareholder that's out there on an individual basis. And for me, that gives a lot of confidence and security to those long-term investors that actually, you know, I've got the same aims and ambitions that they have. You know, we want to build a very successful, large company which is extremely well valued.
One other question talks about the market cap of the company. 136 million is where it is at the moment. What's that pricing in this journey you're on?
So the price increase was led by a lot of private investors becoming excited about the journey that we're on. We saw a big rise, as you said, last year, and that was fueled by the funds selling down from the microcap end of the business to as we progressed up that market cap journey. And the shares were taken by private investors in the main who wanted to be part of a long-term journey of something that was developing and creating this new industry. And so for us, the market cap is kind of irrelevant. It's what the private investors are placing on it. As you know, the business now is well funded, having done a very oversubscribed placing. And for the management, it's about actually running the business, not running the share price. That's not to say that we don't take on board our responsibilities to the shareholders. We work very hard in order to try to get to the point at which we can reach new highs. That's our job as a board.
Yeah, and of course I think there's been some recent reports about a fund selling out of Versarien. What was all that about? Were you told about that, the sale of what, 8 or 9 million?
Yeah, we have a very good relationship with our funds. As the share price rose, they've been on the journey for a long time. I think both Katie and Gervais had bought shares at the very early stage of our business, and they've locked away some profits, which is great. And when the market cap rises as quickly as it does, then there's always going to be an element of profit taking, which is why you see the movement in the share price sometimes.
Yes, I've mentioned, I think most recently that drop with the Herald UK, wasn't it, Katie Potts, you referred to there. Just to quickly catch up with a couple of other questions if I can. We've got some other questions around the business. What are the last reported graphene revenues by the company to support this sort of market cap?
The revenues are very, very small, so they were sub 100k. And the reason for that is because a lot of our customers are in that testing phase. The customers that we've got chosen as our 5 key priorities, one of the largest construction companies, one of the largest textile companies, one of the largest electronics companies in China, for instance, they're all big, big potentials. So we have to make sure that we have enough stamina to get through that kind of valley of death that occurs as the testing phase goes through. I'm pleased to be able to report that we're seeing some great test results, and we'll be able to update our shareholders in the near future. And we haven't actually failed any tests that we've ever been put in front of. So for us, that's a really good position to be in. And it's about now getting that focus, because we know that if we focus and land those 5 contracts that we're talking about, then actually we can validate the business model, which we've always talked about, which is to go from the inquiry to the NDA, through to the collaboration agreement through that testing phase to actual orders. And we're starting to see those now. So we announced the first aviation part, which is going into short-haul flights in Europe. As we speak, so that's a good place to be.
Yeah, got a question come through, a bit of a technical question. What price per kilogram to the nearest $50 do you expect to sell nano per kilogram at the multi-ton level. Of course, the bigger the business is, the more you can scale up, presumably.
The simple answer to that is as high as we can get, and that depends on the competitive landscape. Not only competitive in terms of the graphene and the type of graphene that we're competing against, but also in terms of the products that we're substituting. One of the great things about graphene is that it's a bit like some of the conventional materials, but on steroids. You know, so the properties that are already there, say in batteries or supercapacitors or fillers for carbon fibre, can be really, really improved through the use of these two-dimensional materials. And don't forget, last year we also announced a number of new products, so not only graphene or nanine as we call it, but lower grades of graphene for not so critical applications, and also our boron nitride product, which is called hexatine, which is now starting to get some commercial traction as well.
You mentioned at the highest price possible. Are we talking big margins here on potential sales, or are you working wafer thin margins?
No, I mean, I think there'll be some commodity element to this material over a period of time, but it all depends on the competition. And what we've tried to do for the last 2 years is to build the fundamental foundations which enable us to be able to produce the highest quality of graphene at the highest margin, which makes it cost effective for the customer, because sometimes the benefits are not just in the material price, they're in the overall cost of the application. So for instance, that part I told you about for the aircraft, the benefit comes not necessarily from the improved strength or rigidity that we're able to give that product, but by altering the manufacturing process and altering the flame retardancy.
Right. Next question. Versarien recently changed Nomad from Arden to Canaccord. Is there an analyst at Canaccord who follows Versarien, and has there ever been a research note published?
Early days, and Alex is the guy who's writing our research note at Canaccord. The reason for the change of broker from Arden, and we were very happy with the service we got in Arden, is as the business goes on its international journey. We've already talked about China, but we've got guys just come back from Korea and Japan and all of these other nations, and not discounting America, of course. We kind of need a broker with a bit of a bigger reach. So we're starting to get inquiries from investors from those areas who are learning about what we're doing. We've already been on Chinese national TV. We're starting that journey in South Korea as well, which means that we just need a broker with a bit of a further reach.
Yeah, and do you anticipate a note out on Versarien in the near future? Or?
Yes, we do, yes. We're working on that now.
Right, okie dokie. Let's follow up on some of the others. Some of your competitors seem to be scaling up production to meet demand. When do you anticipate being able to do the same? How do you foresee doing this?
Scale up is an interesting thing. You have to. We've elected to scale using our reserves, the reserves that we've generated from the UK Stock Exchange, to meet demand. The other alternative strategy is to build demand and let them come and use it. And we think that that's too risky at the moment until we've proved ourselves through its development stage and actually been able to validate the business model. So it's a continuous process for our guys in Cheltenham. And in fact, we just before Christmas commissioned the very latest machine, which is about 1,000 times bigger than when we first started. And that's in its own dedicated facility, so that we can demonstrate that to not only potential JV partners, but also to commercial clients to show how we can scale. Through January, it's been a very busy couple of months, despite the lack of news in the through the RNS channels. The guys have been very, very busy, and a team went out to Europe to look at the next big scale-up opportunity, which is continuous processing. And that's not a done deal yet. That takes some engineering, it takes some science, it takes all of these key connections that we've got at the University of Manchester and the University of Cambridge. But we're confident that that's the way to go forward.
In terms of the scaling up process, are you a naturally conservative person attaching risk to this? Do you see it as a real risk, or do you just say, look, there is a risk, but we'll get through it? I mean, the scaling up process, is it possible from your position here?
Absolutely. So I'm a great believer, having worked in the F1 industry and had some experiences with some of the greats in that industry, that any problem can be overcome. It's just a matter of enthusiasm, time and money. And those are the three things that we're working on, making sure that our teams have got. So in terms of scale up, we don't see any reason at the moment why we can't scale up to these very large quantities. We are very conservative, and the quantities of material that we can produce are very well outlined and detailed. We don't make very large claims that can't be unsubstantiated, and our clients know that. But what we are able to do is tell our clients how we can get from A to B, which means that they have a huge amount of confidence, which is why we signed so many collaboration agreements last year.
Yeah. Another question coming in, talking about the building materials business. One of your biggest opportunities lies in that area. You have signed a number of MOUs in this space recently. Roughly how long do you think it'll take for these to turn into commercial agreements which generate sustainable long-term income? I mean, you touched on MOUs earlier and you spoke a little bit about the importance you attach to them. But in direct answer to that question, how do you see that part of the business developing?
So we have multiple opportunities in the construction industry, both in the US, in Europe, and also in the Far East. And they're going through different development stages, and they're running at different rates. The first one, which we announced, was AECOM, and we're very pleased with the progress we're making there. It's a different application to what we were anticipating originally when we first started having conversations with AECOM. But it suits us very, very well. We have a lot of knowledge in this particular area, and that's progressing extremely well. So I think we did an update in January where we said that we were continuing to supply them not only in December but through January, and that's all happened. And they've been very efficient in the material that they've used. We haven't had a lot of problems in testing. There's always some design changes that the final customer, AECOM in this case, wants to make, and some tiny tweaks for the applications, but very pleased with progress there.
I think you sent, 200 kilograms of material, I think, didn't you, to AECOM in January. The question around that is, are you able to update the progress of the final test of the structures and the materials that it's now used on?
Yeah, so the testing is progressing well. These are very large structures, and they're produced by one of AECOM's subcontractors, so we're working very closely with them. We've seen some issues in their scale-up, not necessarily in our scale-up, and we've been able to supply the material as required for them to help their process. As I said to you before, they were very, very efficient in their testing, which meant they didn't actually need to use as much material as we'd originally anticipated, which is a great thing for the company because it shows that the prior knowledge that we had from, say, the University of Manchester or the University of Exeter, we were able to map directly into this application and get a real good head start, which breeds really good confidence, not only from the subcontractor, but also from the final customer, AECOM in this case.
Yeah. Sticking with the AECOM deal, are you now in a position to provide more colour on your early December statement that you sent out? The volumes of graphene that are required in these types of structures are significantly larger than for many other applications, given the scale of the structures being produced. You've already said that they're using less material than they would initially have expected to have used. But is there any more colour you can add to what's going on?
Yeah, just to clarify that, they're using less material. They're actually using more material in the structures, but they're wasting less material in their testing program. Waste, yeah. So what we can say are these are big construction projects. These are very large capital projects that are being done across the globe. And what we know is that we took the decision way back in 2018 to scale up, which is why we commissioned the new plant in December, which is now ready to accept that new contract. And with the focus on these 5 opportunities, then that will put the business under pressure, which is why the team were out in Europe looking at bigger capacities. At this stage, we have the testing going on, and as we progress through that, then we'll see this validation of the business model. Yeah.
On going back to MOUs and the monetization actually of the IP, in fact, you do own a number of patents, don't you? I think that's key here. I'd like to get an idea as to when Versarien expects the business to monetize the intellectual property, having signed a multitude of MOUs covering multiple potential products. Is there a monetization of the intellectual property that you have, which is going to bring benefit to shareholders?
Absolutely. So it's always our intention to run a proper business. It's always our intention to get to those substantial revenue streams. This is why we're dealing with some of the largest companies in the world. We see the targets as being very, very high. The simple answer, and one that's not going to get me in any trouble with the Nomad or sound like some kind of forward forecast, is that we'll get there as soon as we can. The company is pushing as hard as it can, and that's always part of our intention. We have a number of opportunities at the moment to be able to satisfy that, either through joint ventures, through licensing agreements, or through the manufacture of the material and its subsequent derivatives, including polygreen that we announced late on in the year. So the idea is to get to those revenue streams just as we can. Probably one of the things that feeds into one of your earlier questions is how do you value this business? And we would say that actually we're probably not one of those businesses that you can measure in a conventional PE type ratio. This is very much about the opportunity that lies in front of us. The value comes from being the leader in that, and we're absolutely convinced that we're starting to see some consolidation in the market now. A lot of the people that we would have considered to be competitors a number of years ago, maybe 2-3 years ago, you forget how short the time actually is, maybe even only 18 months ago, have actually disappeared. Yeah. And so what we're seeing is a reduced number of higher quality opportunities, and we work very, very closely with all of those to overcome some of the challenges of bringing new technology. So for instance, we're working with a number of people around REACH, for instance, which is a chemical quality standard, almost health and safety standard, which you have to have if you're going to supply into Europe. So that we've got a guy, Graham, who's working on that process and going through all of that. And once you reach certain thresholds, you need to have that documentation in place. So that's all underway.
What's the first product you expect to anticipate to roll out commercially, and what sort of names are we looking at in terms of products to watch?
So we're heavily focused on 5 key targets. The management team know that the pressure's on them. You can see from the share chart that that what we will see is a requirement to be able to validate and prove what we're doing. That comes from getting through that business model I told you about earlier. And so what I've said to the team is, even though you've got a massive hopper full, let's just focus down to the 5 ones. Let's get some confidence. Let's show what we can do. So we have AECOM that we've already talked about, which is a massive construction project, which I've already said will put the company under pressure. Not necessarily in the manufacture of the graphene, but in that particular, we're also involved further up the supply chain as well, making the precursor materials. So construction, textiles, and products within the Chinese arena.
We've spoken about the rise and subsequent partial fall in the stock. I mean, we've got one question coming here. The stock is seen as Marmite in the market. Investors either love it or hate it. What is it that the bears, you think, don't like about Versarien? Is it just the fact that it's gone too high, too fast, too quickly, and they're trying to sell out and trying to short or whatever? Or what is it? Is there an underlying risk to what you're doing?
No, I think it's just a game. So there are different types of people, and there are speculators and there are investors on the bull side, and then on the bear side you have those that are just trying to make a quick buck by bringing the price down so that they can recoup some revenue that way. Or they really don't like the story, and
in which case you just avoid it.
Yeah, we just avoid it.
Yeah. Look, one final question actually brings us back to what, in fact, we were talking about before we went to air, and this is the use of Twitter. You're very you use Twitter a lot to communicate with investors. The question here: do you see Twitter as an important tool for informing the market for new information? Clearly, you're committed as a publicly listed company to produce RNS regularly. Do you feel ever the need necessarily perhaps maybe to use Twitter more than you should otherwise in order to qualify positions or clarify? Do you suggest investors use Twitter in communicating with you, or are there other methods?
So when we first started this business in 2011, what we really wanted to do was do things slightly differently. We wanted not to be, so all of our IT systems were based on the cloud. We've just fitted EV chargers in our factories for our employees. We're trying to do everything different that we can for the better. And one of the things that struck me about AIM companies was the lack of transparency, the lack of accountability, and the lack of being able to actually be able to communicate with the people that are making your decisions, the people that are, our job is relatively easy. We've got a day job to do, we've got tasks to complete, but as an investor, as a shareholder, you kind of giving over your trust to the management. And I think that CEOs and C-level staff should be accountable front and centre, and that's why we do so many regular events in order to meet the team and to really genuinely ask for assistance and to genuinely validate what we are doing is in the right interest for everybody that's involved in this. We've kind of got a family kind of ethos around us, which we think is fantastic. And that's actually enabled things like direct contact with customers. It's enabled things like different relationships with advisors in the city. And it's really opened up, and it's kind of brought everybody really together, which we kind of like. Now that comes back to your Marmite kind of situation. Some people don't like that openness, they don't like that transparency, and so they kind of push against what is the norm. But just before Christmas, I tried to put a little bit back into our shareholders, and I met with a very, very good investor. He goes by the name of Scrutable on some of the bulletin boards. 92 years old, and fantastic guy, very, very clever, been involved in businesses all his life, including some time in Germany. But he was unable to come to any of the investor events. So I took the day, worked on the train and went down and saw him. And I got a valuable insight, and I learnt an awful lot off that gentleman, which then we can plough back into the business. And so, every day's a learning day, and I managed to be able to reap some really, really good information and advice off the very sage individual. So it's that kind of atmosphere and that kind of ethos that we really wanted to promote from the early days.
So from the CEO's seat, what's 2019 looking like?
I can't believe we're almost coming up to March, to be honest. Yeah. And what we've seen so far is a very, very busy January and February. A lot of this is foundation work. I think we've met with 4 ambassadors. We've met with who have all pledged support. We've met with some very large global companies who are also very interested in our story. They want to see these products getting into market, and they've again pledged their support. And the team's been very, very busy. I've got to thank my team. They've done an amazing job. I don't get to travel as much as those guys do now, which is great as far as I'm concerned. I've got to try and hold things together here, and they've been really busy as well. So we've got fantastic support from the government. We've got 2 secondees from the Department of International Trade, which have really, really assisted in negotiations overseas. Lots and lots of international expansion being talked about in South Korea, Japan, Singapore, and China. And then we've got something like 23 collaborations that we're also working on, where we are kind of really pioneering science. And I know it sounds strange, but our non-exec director, Ian Gray, actually put on his Twitter last night a quote from Brunel's funeral, one of the finest engineers ever to walk on the land. And I was kind of remarking how some of the stuff that the guys in the factories and in the research labs at Manchester and Cambridge are actually on the same journey that he was over 100 years ago, and they're kind of finding new things out on a day-to-day basis, which is really, really exciting. I have absolutely no problem getting the enthusiasm to get up and go to work every day. It's an amazing journey, and it's really great to see some of these products now hitting the real world.
Finally, Brexit, does it worry you?
Brexit itself doesn't worry us at all. We see it as a massive opportunity either way. What does worry us is the uncertainty that it's causing in the markets. We've already talked about the effect on shares in general across the whole market, and I think a lot of that is due to uncertainty. I think people really don't mind now whether we leave or whether we stay. They'll make the best. We've always, as a nation, we've always been very good at making the best of a situation. And I think, there are massive opportunities for us, whichever way it goes. But what we really need as a company is certainty, so we can start to make plans. We don't really know what's coming next month yet, and that's very difficult to forward think. What we do know is that there are massive opportunities overseas, and we know that there are massive opportunities in Europe. So we've just got to work out the way of being able to actually really get hold of those.
Okay, well, it's been a pleasure catching up with you. I'm really grateful for the amount of time we've been able to spend with you. But Neill, thanks indeed for joining us. Neill Ricketts is the founder and chief executive of Versarien.